Hello, welcome to Walpole United WFC.
Good evening and welcome to Walpole United, the AFU Women's Football Chat Show with me, Matt Crane. Tonight, we've got two guests joining me. Ben, welcome to the show, your first Tuesday show. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's good. It's been a while since I've been on with you guys, so nice to see everyone again.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gareth, you've managed to make it this time. That's I don't want to say surprising, but it's just funny based on Sunday's events. For those that don't know, Gareth never made the 7:30, 8 o'clock call.
Yeah, what an absolute disaster. I set 3 alarms and just slept through them all, so I'll have to make sure that next time I set 4.
Wait a minute, I was going to say, Gareth's got a role coming up where he needs to be up and out the door, and Sunday you failed, so never mind. At least you've made tonight. Tonight's show, then, obviously, we're going to, as we mentioned, we're going to discuss expanding the leagues. It's something that's been spoken about probably for some time, to be fair, but I think more prominently in the last sort of couple of weeks. I know Tom Gary's written articles on it. There's been players and managers speak on it. So we're going to sort of go through that tonight, talk about WSL, talk about Championship, our views on how we can do it. Obviously, it's got to be right financially and it's got to be right in terms, especially lower down in terms of travel and things of how it can be, you know, where it's really going to grow the pyramid rather than sort of hinder it. So we're going to go through the lot tonight. I'll start with yourself then, Ben. Obviously, thinking about the WSL, it's been professional now for quite a while, fully professional. You know, things are improving in it. We've got the Sky deal. We've got more coverage. You know, attendances are getting there slowly. What do you make of it then in terms of looking to expand it? I'm thinking maybe number-wise, because I know, like I said, you know, some people I've read have said like 2 more teams. Some have said 5 or 6. But what are your thoughts on sort of starting off with the WSL?
Yeah, and I think it's something that needs to happen, but I would rather it happen correctly than we kind of go at it. It's slightly faster than may have otherwise been done. So, for example, I think at the moment we can see in the Championship that Liverpool are probably clearly ready to come back to the top flight again. It's below that concerns me slightly without the right funding, because we know that there's money going into the more money going into the Championship next year. But as far as I'm aware, we don't know how much. The figure that's been bandied around covers both the Super League and the Championship. So we don't know as yet, as far as I know, what chunk of cash the Championship's going to get from that. So I guess my concern is, if we're going to do it, we need to do it sustainably. We don't want to see clubs coming up not necessarily too early, but before they've got the sustainability behind them. Because I think if you promote 2, 3 or 4 teams up, clearly there's going to be blowout scorelines in the early stages between the top teams. The other hand, obviously, you've got potentially a closer battle down at the bottom half of the table. But I guess the concern in the back of my mind is that you've got teams in the past, you know, for example, Yeovil, who went up, financially found it very, very difficult to survive. Yeovil as a club don't exist anymore. They're now Bridgewater, because you guys played them in the FA Cup. What was Yeovil not so long ago. So my concern is, okay, yes, you know, you've got teams consistently like Durham who have been at the top for a number of years. But my concern is, are they ready sustainably to jump up to the top flight? And I guess there's stadium issues as well with some of those teams too, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Gareth, do you want to sort of add in your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way, if it was down to me, that I would kind of deal with the kind of gradual expansion would be kind of through promotion. And I've kind of talked about the idea of a playoff several times before. You would have Liverpool be automatically promoted as champions, and then have what looks like it's going to be Birmingham playing a playoff match against the runner-up of the Championship. That would then, you know, if the team isn't ready, if the squad is weak, then you would imagine that they would lose that game, and you know, there's an idea that the stronger side would win and stay in the WSL or get promoted. So that's kind of one potential way. yeah, I agree with Ben in the sense that whilst I think expansion is the right thing to do, it's about how we do it properly. We don't want teams to come up and then to have massive issues and then either disappear completely or go back down and not be sustainable and just get relegated time and time again. We've seen Notts County were reaching cup finals a few years ago. Yeovil, there's been issues there. Sunderland were a top flight side not too long ago. They've only just got back into the Championship. So we don't want to see kind of clubs like that start disappearing again. But I think, we shouldn't be at the point where we are when there's 7-8 games left and looking at the bottom of the table thinking, okay, well, it looks pretty set that the Birmingham are likely to be the team that go down. I'm not saying that that's absolutely sorted, but with Leicester's uptick in form, it looks as though it's going to go that way. And with kind of greater teams, that mid-table battle would kind of be extended as well. And I think overall, just the quality of the game would improve. And also, if there's more teams, there's more opportunity to make money. There's, if you, instead of playing 22 games, 11 home games, if you're in a league of 16 and you're playing an extra 6 games a year, then that's an extra 6 opportunities to make that money and make it more profitable to be in a top flight. So there's going to be a balancing act somewhere. But naturally, through having more teams, there's going to be more opportunities to gain revenue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I want to move on to, sort of sponsorships and finance shortly. But Ben, I don't know if you want to take that, the question on screen about through government legislation. I'm not entirely sure what is meant by that, but yeah, I don't know if you want to maybe.
I think it still wouldn't solve the finance issue. There would government or the FA can, effectively you have to be full time, don't you, to play in the WSL? Yeah. And there's talk that eventually, not too far down the line, the Championship may move that way. I know they're looking at to have average within the next 5 years. I think they want average crowds of 1,000 in the Championship, 6,000 in the Super League. I think you can say, right, the law is that the Championship has to be full time, but I don't think there's that many teams in that division at the moment that could, without a massive injection from elsewhere, as things stand, that could fund that. Now, I mean, clearly, if the legislation came in, if it did, clearly, then you may well get of other people coming in, saying that this is our local team, we want to support you and all the rest of it. That may well happen. I guess it's a big jump to take because of the financial risk of going part-time to full-time when not many of those clubs are getting 4-figure gates.
Yeah, I think the attendance is like a big part of it. I've been looking at sort of figures that have published their accounts after COVID, and the hit they took behind closed doors is massive. And like you say, attendance plays, quite a big part in that. I suppose it's one of them. It's highlighted by Coventry, a conversation I had the other day, that just because you throw cash at something does now not automatically entitle you, or not entitle you, but mean promotion.
Yeah.
And I think it's something like you say, clubs have to be very careful because there's a fine line between throwing money at it and wanting success, and then in Coventry's case, owners backing out, and obviously having a men's side behind you and also throwing cash at it. Because, somebody said to me the other day, well, why can't Southampton and Wolves come up to the Championship or the WSL and open the licenses up? But at the same time, if they're not ready, I feel, in my view, there's a process where it's kind of like running before you can walk. They've only been very recently sort of well funded for where they're at. And I think that, it's only right for them and it's only right for the game, and especially other teams. I know when we formed at Man United, there was a lot of sort of unrest that was going straight into the Championship, and West Ham as well, jumping up leagues. I suppose for me, it's got to be a sort of a fair process for all, really. I don't know if you want to sort of add to that as well, Gareth, and then you can come in as well, Ben.
Yeah, I just think that if you automatically open up the Championship, for example, for Southampton and for Wolves, that does a massive disservice to Ipswich, Oxford, Fylde, who are all ahead of them on merit. Like, if you just promote those teams just because they've got a Premier League club, it's not the fault of Ipswich, Oxford, Fylde that they're that their men's team isn't a top flight side. In the case of File, their men's team tried to kind of like just dissolve the women's side before there was social media backlash a year or so ago. So, for them to be top of the table at this point in the season, they deserve that opportunity to get promoted themselves. And if it doesn't work, then the chances are that they'll come back down next year. But they'll also, they will be part-time, and they will be able in the Championship to kind of keep those costs lower. And they won't have the same backing that a lot of the men's sides do. And also, it's worth saying that although a lot of clubs will share a name, that is all they'll share.
Yeah.
It wasn't until a year or so ago that Leicester were brought within the men's kind of umbrella as well. Before them, kind of two separate clubs using the same team name. So, yeah, just because they use the badge of Wolves now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're backed by the men's side. And it's going to be the same for any club kind of in that division. Looking at MK Dons, Portsmouth, etc. There's no guarantee that. I mean, they may well be. I'm not 100% sure on those individual circumstances, but they may not be backed by the men's side and have that funding readily available to them. So, I think the expansion needs to be organic. It can't be too forced. And those clubs that get promoted need to be the stronger sides. And then if they're the stronger sides that are ready to play at that level, then that's going to make the competition better and more attractive.
Yeah. Ben, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, Ipswich have been sort of building for many years at National 1 level. I mean, they've kind of been a de facto professional team in inverted commas in the fourth tier for a while, not officially full time, but head in that way. They've got a big academy. Obviously, I think I'm right in saying they've got the East Anglian Academy there as well. So they've got a lot of backgrounds of players coming through. So I think actually you could potentially at this moment in time make a bigger argument for Ipswich than some of those other teams, as you say, on merit, but also because there has been a shift behind the scenes with the men's club as well at Portman Road too. I think the scene I know we're going to touch on further down later on, but I think the argument for expansion further down is a lot stronger than nearer the top in terms of the immediacy of being able to do it in terms of strength. But that's something for later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing, obviously, at the minute, and Gareth touched on it before about a potential playoff. I think, we look at it and there's 12 clubs, obviously, in the top two tiers at the minute of women's football, which is great. But I'm going to link in fixtures because I think for me, sometimes the frustration I feel, and I know others I've spoken to in the past have felt, is sometimes there's occasionally pretty big gaps. So, for example, if you get knocked out of a cup competition, whether that's FA Cup, Conti Cup, occasionally there tends to be like a 2 or 3 week gap. Do you think then, Ben, that with that, maybe adding to teams that would improve just in general? Because obviously we don't want a fixture overload and we don't want to burn out of players, but I just feel like we have the winter break as well. And then it kinds to be anything after Christmas can be sort of up and down. Do you think if we added to that even a couple of teams, that would sort of help but not over congest the fixtures?
I think it would. I think also we need to bear in mind here the report that came out last week from FIFA about sort of like the underloading the fixtures for women's teams as well. I think if you looked at the scheduling, I think it could be made better in terms of the way the loading is at the present time anyway. Because for example, if you've got a team competing in the Champions League, mainly the other side of Christmas, the pre-Christmas period, you've also got sort of Conti Cup games thrown in there, and you've got all sorts of other games being thrown in there. So would it be worth thinking about the teams that are in Europe? They still enter the Conti Cup at the beginning stage, but that beginning stage doesn't kick in until after Christmas, when that 6-game group stage of the Champions League is over. Obviously, we would hope that everyone from England made it through, but that competition is crazily tough now, so that may not be the case. But if we're looking at getting these players and these clubs more games, in addition to promoting extra teams in, that could possibly be another way around it as well.
Yeah. Gareth, do you just want to add to that? Like I say, obviously, just in terms of balancing it, because I know another frustration, I know it can't be helped, is like the start of the season and then you play a couple of games, then there's an international break. And I know sometimes it's qualifiers, but when it's friendlies, it seems to really bug people. I mean, you look at the impact of the Lionesses and it's huge, and I feel like that's fantastic. But I sometimes do worry, is maybe a friendly being thrown in there to the detriment of maybe promoting the sort of top two leagues? I don't know. Like I said, I'm not saying it affects it, but maybe with more teams and more fixtures, if we sacrificed a couple of friendlies for the sake of promoting the league, what do you think on that, or just fixtures in general?
I think international breaks are difficult because they're governed by FIFA or by UEFA or kind of whoever's organising these competitions. And if you didn't have like an international break for the WSL Championship, then you'd lose a load of players like the Rugby Premiership does during the Six Nations. So those domestic games are still going on now with all their international players not there, and it does really hurt the product. I think what kind of should happen is that it kind of mirrors the men's international breaks, not perfectly, but for example, you have the men's international break 1 week and the women's international break the following week. So you have one in September, October, November, and I think there's usually one in March or something. It's this international break for me that I find strange, the one that we're kind of in now, where there's an international break to play a friendly competition. And I kind of understand kind of why it's there. It's there because previously, like obviously the way for the women to make the money was by playing internationals, and so that there was a lot of international games. It's how people like Carly Lloyd have got incredible numbers of caps. But maybe, friendlies during those autumn breaks are okay because you don't really want players to go on an international break, just play the one game and then come back, because you have got to build towards a tournament, really. And I guess that's what this international break is for as well. It's to build towards those Euros. But yeah, I think it's a tricky one that isn't really something that the FA or the WSL can particularly influence, because it is going to be set by confederations and by FIFA.
Although, having said that, the present international window and also the one during the Asia Cup did not result in the A-League women being stopped. So that's carrying on this weekend with players. So there's a number of football ferns playing for New Zealand in the She Believes. Australia haven't got any games in this window, but obviously the Asia Cup they did. So whilst the majority of the Matildas are playing in Europe and particularly England, there was a good sort of 5 or 6 players from the A-League women, top players from those clubs that left their clubs for 2-3 weeks. So yeah, it can happen.
Yeah, I suppose for me, it's probably, I know you mentioned, Gareth, about sort of FIFA and you away from things like that, but I the Tom Gary article that I sent to you both, obviously he mentioned in that, that there was, I think it was the summer of 2023, and there was no international dates currently fixed or planned, which I thought was interesting. Obviously, they plan ahead, as we know, but I thought, if there was a potential to change, you could potentially look at that and say, well, actually, we could plan around that, because obviously, like I said before, tournaments, yes. Do we need so many friendlies? You could argue possibly not. I know you mentioned there, Ben, obviously the Asia Cup. And then I think there was criticism after that for sort of, teams coming back and being straight into a couple of league games, and then it's international break again.
Yeah, I mean, 2023 is a strange one because the World Cup it starts in July, runs through July and the whole of August. So there will have to be international games in June and July, simply to sort of narrow down final squads.
Yeah, absolutely. Just final thoughts on the championship then. Just sort of, again, personal opinions on this. Obviously, we talked about expanding it. Would you, or either of you, we'll start with you, Ben, would either of you be in favour of a sort of playoff similar to like rugby, where, like Gareth said, it was sort of top of the championship plays bottom of the WSL or even the top 3 of the Championship against bottom 3 of the WSL? Or would you rather stick to something like a simple sort of 2 up, 2 down?
I think in the immediate term, I would say 1 up, 1 down, plus the runner-up, the Championship plays the second bottom Super League.
Yeah.
So then you've got the potential for 2. And you would argue then that the runners-up would have to prove themselves to come up. Longer term, so maybe, I don't know, let's say if it's done with a proper plan and proper financial plan, then I'd say 5 years, let's go 2 up, 2 down.
Yeah. Gareth?
Yeah, I like the idea of the playoff to go up. I like the idea of 2 up, 2 down as well. But just to kind of use the example of the Bundesliga, they have the 16th place side in the Bundesliga and the 3rd place side in the Zweite Bundesliga playoff. So it's like the 3rd worst versus 3rd best. And over the years, it's generally been relatively even. So like Köln won last season, Bremen before from the Bundesliga, but like you do occasionally, like in 2019, get the sort of second tier side, which was Union Berlin at the time, winning those games, and then have gone on to have like a really good campaign up in the top flight. So I think that's an opportunity for a bit of excitement kind of around that promotion. It also kind of adds another sort of something to fight for in the WSL. You have those teams that are kind of in and around the bottom. If you can just be like, okay, we're cut adrift from the other sides, but if we can fight to not be the worst team, we've got a chance of saving our season. I think it adds a bit of excitement. But a standard 2 up, 2 down wouldn't be opposed to that either.
Yeah, I'm going to move it on to the Championship then. Obviously, we talked about before about sort of, we mentioned Liverpool was probably the only team really suitable to make the step up. And I think, again, it's one of those where it does need to be a little bit of a cautious approach. Obviously, we do want to add to it, but it's like I mentioned before, you don't want to sort of run before you can walk. And I think you've got to be careful. You mentioned Yeovil earlier, Ben, that we don't sort of, like send teams up that aren't ready so that then they struggle financially or sort of, reduces the quality of the league. If you've got a team that, I don't know, let's throw London City Lionesses in, for example, they go up and they get absolutely hammered every week in the WSL. People sort of kind of look at it, don't they, and think, oh, actually, you know what? That product, if you're looking at it as maybe an investor or a prospective owner of a club, you look at it and think, actually, that product might not be worth your time and investment. So I think it's really important that we do get that balance. But Gareth, I'll start with you. Where could you see it working in terms of the Championship then? Would that be something, obviously I know we talk a lot about sort of the ridiculous North versus South, scrapping that in the 3rd tier and sending both up. But just before we sort of get into that then, what would you sort of think for the Championship, or what would the plans be there maybe?
I think as well that you would get more investment if you're looking at something there's a possibility of going up. You look at that table at the moment, Liverpool are 10 points clear at the top. They've got 7 games left to play. They're not going to get caught, really. They've lost 1 game all season. It's just not going to happen. But then you've got London City in 2nd, all the way down to Crystal Palace in 6th. They're separated by 4 points. So if there was something to play for in that 2nd position, I think you would get people investing in the Championship more because there's more opportunities to progress. Whereas at the moment, people are going to look at that and go, oh, well, there's no point actually putting money into those clubs now because Liverpool are going to get promoted. So we'll see what happens in the summer or next year. And I just think that is actually kind of hindering the growth of the league financially by the fact you can have one dominant team come in and kind of walk it. Durham have been up in and around those promotion spots for years. I mean, they're 5th at the moment. Bristol City came down last year. No one really expected them to go straight back up. But, they're in a position where if there was something for coming 2nd, they would be fighting for it. And I think that league would be so much more interesting and so many more eyes would be on it, like there was a few months ago when we didn't know who was going to win. Liverpool could have won the titles. Lioness, London City were going well. Durham were going well. And I just think that overall the product would be better. And if there's a better product, then you're going to get more investment. And it also just kind of gives teams time to have a dip in form, rebuild, and kind of push for it again. Charlton were there or thereabouts, fell away for a few games and have now gone and put a string of form together, and they're a point off London City Lionesses. So I just think that what's putting investors off, as much as a team getting absolutely hammered every single week in the WSL would, but just that lack of opportunity to progress is also going to put people off.
Ben, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, spot on in every respect. I think also the thing for me, I think that is absolutely right. Which is why I think we need to factor in a second promotion place, whether it's automatic or whether it's playoffs, potentially playoff in a way, because there is always that. There's always tends to be that pack, doesn't there, behind the top team most years in that division, which could really sort of keep the interest going. I think also there's an argument for increasing the size of the championship as well. And I know we're going to talk about sort of the north and south in the league below, but there are so many teams at tier 3 that are ready to take that step up. And it should be done. It should be earned through performances on the field rather than sort of being parachuted and all the rest of it. But also below that, in tier 4, I mean, the local tier 4 level to me, the Division 1 Southeast. I mean, there's so many teams in that division. You've got AFC Wimbledon really pushing big time now. I mean, they're getting 4-figure crowds at Power Lane for their home games. You've got #United down there. You've got Billericay down there. There's all sorts of teams, and even in the sort of the tier 5 London and Eastern regional leagues below, you've got so many teams down there. Dulwich Hamlet, Ashford Town. Fulham, Worthing, Dartfords, Wyndham in Norfolk, Kings Lynn, Wroxham. There's so many teams in there that are capable of playing tier 4, tier 3 football as it is. So I think the minimum for promoting into the championship needs to be, I would say, a minimum of 3 teams. It has to be absolutely the champions of North and South. No arguments, have to go up. We can't have this ridiculous faffing around with the top 2 the top 1 in each division play each other off, because that's just ridiculous. Whether or not we go to a straight 2 up, I think from each division, I think would depend on whether you increase the size of the division, because obviously in a 12-team league, having 4 going down is not really the way you want to do things, I don't think. Yeah. So then do we then say, okay, then let's have the top 2 automatic, the top 1 in each of those divisions automatic goes up, and the runners up play off for a 3rd place for the time being until they decide to make it full team championship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spot on. I agree with both your points. And I just want to stick with the championship before we move on then. Obviously, we sort of briefly touched on earlier that obviously as of next year, the championship will have the sponsorship in Barclays. We don't know how much. I'll start with you, Gareth. Do you think, obviously with this sponsorship, obviously we're starting somewhere, which is great with some money. Do you think then that, to maybe, obviously we talked about how we feel it can be more competitive. Do you feel that more teams, if affordable, or if they can afford, should I say, should maybe look to go full time? And I know that might be difficult, like you said before, if there's not really too much incentive wise in terms of going for promotion. Obviously, we've all sort of agreed that we don't want to, see clubs going out of business. But if they could afford it and attract more sponsorships, would you like to see more teams go pro? Because looking at it now, there's quite a few clubs that, I think somebody said to me, Crystal Palace train 4 times a week, but they're not professional. It's like it's not far off. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think if you have a sustainable model, then by all means go for it. I think what we want to see is more clubs doing what Charlton have done, as opposed to what Coventry have done. Those 2 clubs made the decision to go full time in the summer, and both have approached it very, very differently. So yeah, I think it needs to be sustainable. But once it's sustainable, then inevitably, of course, you're going to get better results on the pitch if your players are in training more often. You've got more time to get your ideas across and prepare for the game at the weekend, and you can actually kind of do specific planning for those games rather than just one or two sessions a week. I think it's kind of testament really to how well Palace are doing. Given that, I kind of thought at the start of the season that they would be in and around the bottom third, but relatively comfortable. But they're very much mid-table and a good run of results, and they could finish second in the league. So, it needs to be sustainable. Like, you can still achieve and be kind of semi full-time without being part-time, which is kind of Palace are like there between the two, aren't they? They're not. They train too much to kind of be a typical part-time side, but it's not quite full-time. I think the sustainability is the main thing. If you can afford it and you've got the backing and that backing is secure, then absolutely full-time should be the next step, because you're going to be able to attract better players. You're going to be able to train more, get your ideas across, play better football, get better results, and climb that table. But in the same sense, if it's not sustainable and your kind of finances aren't secure or they're kind of results dependent, then you kind of want to make sure that you've got that money and that you can afford actually to take a season, 2 seasons to get to where you want to be. And it's not a case of, okay, we've gone full time, we need the results this year. At the moment, without that expansion, it will take several years to get those results.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. And I mean, I guess the other thing to bear in mind is that I suppose Coventry United would argue that before obviously what eventually happened, they would have argued that what they were doing was sustainable. I guess we're talking about this in a way with the benefit of hindsight, which they wouldn't have had. So it's sustainability has to be the way to go, and I'm naturally very, very cautious about pushing things before we can run.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware, also at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, yes, at the same time, but these clubs that did make that push, so, like we said, Coventry United and Nike historically in the past, Fulham, for example, back in the early 2000s when they went pro around 2000 and they got to the cup final as a third tier team, for example, that didn't work out and they fell away rapidly. But, who was to say that at a time that may have worked out? It's one of those awkward things that unless you try it, you'll never know. But if you do try it and it doesn't work, you're in deep trouble.
Yeah, I think it's spot on, and I think we're all sort of in agreement with that. I think it's interesting because obviously, Gareth, you talked about building each year and working towards that sort of goal promotion. Obviously, you mentioned Palace, but I think somebody said to me as well, obviously Durham are usually there and thereabouts. Obviously, they've fallen away this year, but Sheffield United and Blackburn were 2 clubs mentioned to me, and somebody said, they have ambitions of going professional. They didn't put a time limit on it, but I think if you look at their model and the way they do it, I mean, yes, they're in the sort of the lower reaches of the Championship, but that said, they're able to attract players each year and slowly improve. And I think for me, that's the right way to do it. Again, it's the phrase we've used is obviously, walking before you can run. The way around, running before you can walk. But things like that, it just shows that you don't need to jump straight into it if you're not 100% feet first, because I think that for me, I'd rather see those 2 teams do that than them both to get the men's team to throw a load of money at it to then withdraw it, or think actually, what, because looking at crowds, especially at Blackburn, they don't get a lot. And I think if they could easily turn around and say, look, this isn't sustainable, we're not funding it because it's making a loss, which most women's football clubs do, then it's one of them, and it's the whole model and the whole picture for me. So it needs to be sort of carefully thought out.
I think as well, if we're talking models and the Championship, we've kind of got to mention Lewis as well in this, because they're doing it in a very different way to pretty much every other team in the. They have got a men's team behind them, and they've got a men's team behind them in a fantastic way, albeit a fairly low down the sort of tier 7 men's team. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, I guess, but that's a very niche model, and it attracts, like Dulwich Hamlet. It attracts a certain group of people, which allow you to progress so far. Whether eventually that would get Lewis further, I don't know. Or I know Dulwich are really a team to watch both in men's and women's. They're tier 5 and they're getting 15. No, they're not. Big pardon. They're getting 500-600 people for home games down in tier 5 because of the ethos of that club in that particular community. So there's ways around it, but if you can sort of pin yourself around a certain niche group or niche identity, but that's only going to work for a handful of teams in certain communities as well, I think.
Yeah, it is an interesting model, and it's something that did come up. I know when Coventry were having problems and people said, could Coventry maybe look at the Lewis model and get fans involved? And like you say, I think lower down, 100% it works. Like you say, obviously sort of a niche target audience or a niche sort of setup. But again, you look at it and you think, well, in the future, maybe the way Lewis could go about it is if an investor comes in and takes a percentage and a percentage is still fan owned. Obviously, we see that in Germany, things like that, that could be potentially a way of, owners / fans having a say still in their club, but obviously with a financial backer that could, propel them even higher. So again, all sort of possibilities that could be looked into. I want to move on then to sort of the National League.
Can I just quickly touch on the idea of fan ownership?
Yeah, go on.
It's only really in Europe where it's seen as being something that's unusual or for the smaller clubs. If you look at South America, it's law in Argentina that all of the clubs are owned by members. If you look in Brazil, you've got clubs like Sao Paulo, Santos, Atlético Mineiro, Corinthians are all owned by members as well. And they're massive clubs in a world kind of sense. Some of those have won the Club World Cup before. So it's a model that can absolutely get success. It's difficult when you're kind of going up against the likes of City, Chelsea, Newcastle now, who are backed by multi-billionaires. But fan ownership as a model, absolutely, particularly in the women's game, is something where I think is really, really kind of plausible and possible kind of going forward. And it's something that, I think if done right, can be really successful.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention it because I know we have had that discussion before. And I think, like you said, people assume that it's like strange, but yet nobody's not really, apart from Lewis, sort of in first and second tier, nobody's really attempted to look at it, even by saying to fans, 10%, 5% of the club. Why not? It's not going to completely kill the club or kill the game. It just gives fans a better say. I mean, this is a show for another time. Obviously, this leads into sort of, what the Women's Football Fans Collective are doing and things like that. But yeah, moving on then to obviously sort of third, fourth, fifth tier. And again, we talk about the need. We may as well start with what you mentioned earlier, Ben, about the sort of the North-South playoff. For those watching that don't know, obviously, basically the winners of the third tier North play the winners of the third tier South in a playoff, and only one goes up to the Championship. I think we're all going to agree it's a ridiculous way of doing it. But do you just want to talk about that, Ben, and sort of maybe ideas around it? Obviously, I know you mentioned about both going up.
Yeah, I think at the moment they're kind of constrained by the fact that there are 12 teams in the Championship and there are 2 teams immediately below. So you either, I guess, are going to come in for a straight 2 up and 2 down. I mean, an ideal world, I think you could argue that 4 should come up in the ideal world. But the only way I think that will realistically happen is, as we touched on before, is if the Championship increases in size by a minimum of 2 more teams. And there are more than enough teams of a good enough quality below for that to happen, I think. I think even at the end, I know it's too late to do it now, but I know if, for example, you relegated 2 teams this season and promoted 4, I don't think there'd be a massive problem in terms of, I don't think the 4 teams that would come into the division would be massively outclassed in the same way that you would if you did that into the Super League, for example. I think, I know Watford and Sunderland to an extent have maybe not as performed in the way that particularly Watford's would have hoped to have done this season. But I think, if you look at those Ipswiches and you look at those Southamptons and you look at Fylde and and I know Huddersfield have been talking for a long time about progressing, as well. And they played a cup game at the main team stadium. They broke their 10 in doing so. And there's a lot of really good community clubs at Tier 3. I mean, Brighouse are a fantastic team in Tier 3. I mean, they're not, at the moment, going up to Championship is not on the table for them. But I mean, also down in that level, interesting, Newcastle United and Leeds United are right down in sort of Tier 3, Tier 4. And are the women going to see any of this multi-million pounds that are floating around at Newcastle?
Unlikely.
No.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Gareth, I know you've got sort of thoughts on it as well, but it just the whole sort of thing in Tier 3 downwards just it annoys me really. We look at, I know we follow FC closely and we talk about that, and at the minute, obviously in that league, Bolton folded at the start of the season, but yet they're still on about having 3 teams get relegated and 1 come up, and it's like, well, hang on, they've lost a team, so it's imbalanced. Now you want to send 3 down, 1 up, and unbalance it further. Then if you want to talk on Tier 3, 4, 5, and sort of give your thoughts on it.
I mean, the thing for me, it's insane that you can win your league and then not win promotion when there's a league above you. It's just absolute madness. Especially when you look at the quality of sides in that Northern Division, Fylde, Wolves, Derby are playing well. Burnley, have had a decent squad. Forest have played really well as well. And there's a chance that none of them are going to go anywhere. Ipswich got promoted last year, have lost 1 game this year. Southampton have lost 1 game this year. There's a chance that neither of them are going to go up. So it baffles me that is the case. Similarly in Tier 4 as well, Newcastle are flying and they probably are one of the better sides in that division, but Feds are top, and it's again pretty crazy that one of them sides are going to go up. Whereas you think actually, when having kind of seen both teams, you think actually on merit they both deserve that promotion. So 1 up, 1 down is mad, but 1 up, 3 or 4 down is crazy. Like it just doesn't really seem sustainable when a club can come up and they've got to perform at a way better level than they would in any other league in order to stay in the division. It just doesn't seem like a system that's designed to allow teams to grow and progress and kind of move their way through the leagues. It seems very much something that's kind of designed to keep teams down there. It's just pretty crazy. There are some sides that deserve to go down. Hounslow in the Southern Premier Division have played 14, lost 14, and not scored a goal if FA full time is right. So clearly they're in a division that they shouldn't be in. But then if you look at other sides in that division, you're looking at sides, Plymouth, MK Dons, that actually put a run together and they could stay up. But whereas if you're saying if 4 are going down, it's starting to make it look as though there's not really any way out of that gap, and it just kind of, no one wants to see a league kind of be done and finished when there's still 5-6 games to go. And I just think that when there are so many sides that go down, that's kind of what it looks like. 3 down in a 20 side in a 20 team division is fine, but 3 going down out of 12, relegating 25% of your league is just crazy.
Particularly when there's so few coming up. It's not at that level. It's not as if the quality is not there, because there's a massive compact of so many teams in those divisions at Tier 4 and Tier 5 that are regularly up the top year in, year out, but they cannot progress because only one team can come up. It's just nuts. You just can't work it out. Actually, talking about the National League and talking about Tier 4 and fan ownership, I guess we have to mention AFC Wimbledon.
Yeah.
They are, for all sorts of reasons, from the reformation. Well, I say the reformation. Officially, they are the original Wimbledon in terms of the dates and all the rest of it. But in terms of how their club is set up, they are majority fan owned, and it's recently been voted through again that they are continuing to do that, even though the consequences of it in terms of the men's team progression are starting to kick in, even though they've now got their own stadium that the fans paid for. But since that move to Plough Lane has come in, they've really built into the women's team in a big way. So they are now playing the majority of their home games at Plough Lane. They're getting 4-figure crowds down there. They've got a game tomorrow night at home to QPR, so it's a local South London derby under the lights at Plough Lane, which should get a really big crowd down there tomorrow night. It should be interesting, and they're progressing. You know, they were a good chance of finishing top of that table, but that Division 1 South East is seriously strong. You could easily promote 2 or 3 of those teams into Tier 3 and they'd do fine. The immediate division below Tier 5, you know, London, the South East, there's the top 4 or 5 could easily play Tier 4 football.
Yeah.
And I think there's an argument, given their FA Cup run this season, there's a very good argument that Ashford Town could be a decent Tier 3 team, and they're playing Tier 5 at the moment. And that, you know, but all of those teams are hamstrung because only one comes up.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing for me. It's something you sort of mentioned, Gareth. You don't want it to sort of affect teams progressing effectively. You know, if they are ready and they can sort of, you know, again, it's looking into sort of ownership and financial models. And I don't want to go too big into that. But if they're ready and they've got infrastructure on and off the pitch in place, it's a bit disheartening because, like, you know, you've given examples there, Ben. You know, Gareth mentioned in the 3rd tier North. And if you go through the leagues, sort of North and South, 3rd, 4th and 5th tier, like you've mentioned, there's probably a good 3 minimum teams capable of playing upper division, no matter what league they're in. And I think you want to see the growth, but you don't, like I said, obviously, again, I feel like I'm sort of repeating myself, but you don't want it to hinder the clubs. But at the same time, you don't want to affect the pyramid and sort of, you know, the revenue, for example, that they could lose out on. You know, you think you win your league, and then you're not getting your revenue because you don't go up because you've lost some ridiculous playoff.
Yeah.
Or you've been stuck in that league just missing out on promotion for 3 or 4 years. One, as a manager of another club, let's say you're mid-table, you're going to think, well, we're never going to get there because, you know, let's say, for example, Wolves and Southampton haven't gone up. It was Ipswich or something. You just think you've got to play them again. And it's, you know, Southampton are smashing teams 8 to 10-0 every week. And you just think, how is that doing any good for, one, Southampton, and 2, the teams that they're playing? You know, there's players Southampton took from the Championship to go and play, and you think, okay, fair enough, you know, they've had a year now, grow it properly. They've now got that in place, you know, it's allowed them to build a fan base, and, you know, I've just seen they've launched their own women's only Twitter page. So again, it's growing it organically, and I just think in terms of the leagues, you know, it's got to be right. And especially when we had a conversation on Sunday on the way up to FC United, and somebody was telling me that when Coventry were last in the 3rd tier, they were put in 3rd tier South. But yeah, I think there was a team, somebody said a mile up the road, was put in National League 3rd tier North. So again, it's like, well, we're assuming they're going to go down this year. Is there now going to be another imbalance of the league? Because if they do go in the South, that's going to be overloaded. If they go in the North, that potentially is. And I think it's things like that where one team coming down affects 3rd tier because one's potentially got an extra club or not. And I think the whole system for me, I think if they sort it out sort of 5th tier upwards and look at each section, you know, North, South, Southeast, Southwest, then that to me surely says, you know, let's grow it and let's not block these clubs, you know, because I think at the end of the day, there's more than I'd say at least 5 that are capable from 3rd to 5th tier of probably playing in the 3rd tier. And I think holding clubs back is just not the way. I don't know if either of you want to come in on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, sorry, Gareth.
I was just saying, kind of on the structure of the North-South divide, it generally, it's not a guarantee. I don't think that if you're in the Northern Premier this year, that you'll be in the Northern Premier next year. I think they can move teams around based on kind of the geography of the 24 that there is. So you'd imagine if Coventry come down, that they would probably go into the North looking at the sides. and it might mean that maybe somebody like MK Dons maybe or would end up kind of moving if they had to or something like that. But I remember a time a while ago when Kings Lynn were in the National League North for the men's side, and they were kind of having away days up at Blythe, whereas I think it was Cambridge City or something, not an hour down the road, were in the south. And it's just one of those unfortunate things, which is going to be an absolute nightmare with travel. But you'd imagine if Coventry come down, they'll go into the Northern Premier. And then you would assume then that probably sides like whichever is the most southern of West Brom, Stoke, Loughborough, Forest, Derby would probably be the one that end up going into the south. It's not ideal, but I think they do kind of jig it around when sides go up and down.
Yeah, I mean, I know the sort of like the headline, I guess, of this show is expanding the Super League. But I think right now where we are is that tier 5, 4, and 3 are ready for expansion and ready to make the jump now, as in now, not in 2 years' time, not in 5 years' time, now. And I think that if we get that sorted out now, which obviously it's the FA, so it won't happen, but if we did get that sorted out now, then that knock-on effect in terms of quality, moving up those divisions in 2 or 3 clubs, moving up those leagues, then you get a stronger championship because there's stronger teams coming up through the system. Yeah. You get a stronger championship, you get a stronger Super League. Expansion through 5-4-3 within the next 12 months. Yeah. Then say once that's bedded down in 5 years, then go the next step. That way it's sustainable. You've got this insane bottleneck that would not be allowed in men's football. It's just insanity. Would be out and done with. You'd have the progressive clubs moving up, and quality breeds quality, and do it that way. That way, you've got far more sustainability. I think yes, there's risks involved, but I think the risks would be far less than if we ignore all of this and just say, okay, next year let's put 2 more teams in the Super League.
Yeah, I think on that though, because I fully agree. Starting sort of at the bottom does or will, if they did it, would eventually, like you say, improve the Championship and the WSL. But I think another thing for me, and I was thinking about this the other day, was if something like that was done, I think that would help attract a sponsor for sort of 3rd, 4th, 5th tiers, and I think that will help massively because I think if you have that upward movement, people are likely to realise actually there are some very good teams in these leagues. Then you can go to somebody and say, right, this is our product. Could we perhaps get a sponsor? Now, granted, it's not going to be as big as Barclays. We understand that. However, there's no reason why, I don't know, a local business or somebody could not, sponsor that league. I'll start with you, Gareth. Do you think that would be a possible thing? Obviously, looking to attract sponsorships. And I suppose we may as well throw in marketing as well, because that varies, doesn't it, between how good it is and how bad it is, depending on which team you look at.
Yeah, definitely. I think sponsors are a key. It's not going to be something as big as Barclays, just like the National League wasn't anything as big as Barclays or Sky Bet or whoever when Vanarama started sponsoring that. So, it's going to be a smaller sponsor, but that's fine because smaller amounts of money are going to make an equal difference to those clubs as a much larger sum of money would make to the top end of the championship. So, I don't think it needs to be a massive sponsor, but somebody who wants to kind of look at the growth of the game. And, we speak a lot about the Euros this summer being a really good opportunity to grow the game, and it will. But it needs to grow the game kind of from an attendance perspective, which I think is going to be kind of the main thing, but also from a getting players to play perspective. So you want somewhere for them to play first of all, and you want like a route for them to be able to follow. You don't just want people to go into elite academies, spend a couple of years in an elite academy, then leave and drop down to tier 5, and that's kind of just be where they stay playing football whilst they work as a teacher or something like that. you want there to be like a legitimate pathway to improve and find those moves and everything like that, and that's going to come with money. So yes, sponsorship is important. And again, I just think that there are so many clubs in and around those divisions that can beat anybody in and around those divisions. We saw Stourbridge beat Derby in the FA Cup. That was Tier 6 beating Tier 3. Clapton, I think, were Tier 7, made it into the first round proper, and will have beaten clubs from tiers above. FC went toe-to-toe with Brighouse, Tier 4 versus Tier 3. So, I just think there's so many teams in those divisions that can do so much that we really need to kind of make that expansion, and then we'll start to see the quality improve.
Yeah. Ben, do you want to sort of come in on that as well and sort of maybe add in marketing or promotion?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's right. And I guess, I was talking FA Cup. I mean, we mentioned Oxford as a really good, strong team not so while ago, but they were dumped out of the FA Cup by Ashford Town from Tier 5. So, and Ashford, they played London City Lionesses in the next round of the Cup, who at that time only Liverpool were a higher based team in the competition. And not long before half time, it was 1-1. I mean, that tells you, okay, yes, they ended up losing the second half reasonably heavily, but not massively heavily. So that, again, that just emphasises that strength and depth again. And I think if you've got those teams and they're strong enough and they move up through the divisions, then that also creates this romantic element, doesn't it? You've got teams that they've come up from, level 5 and they're now up to Tier 3 or Tier 2 or whatever. And so then you can sort of build a story around that, and those kind of stories, they foster the community. And Ashford had over 300 people at that cup game against London City Lionesses, and that's almost their Ashford Town men's team don't get 100 much more than 100 for match day. So the community, the area that they're in. You've got QPR down the road, you've got Brentford down the road, you've got Chelsea down the road, and for them to be able to do that at a tiny club that they are for their women's team is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So there are ways around it with building these stories, and if you get the local community on board like they're trying to do down at Ashford and the other things, that fosters interest, and that fosters. It starts off with local businesses, doesn't it? And once you get the local businesses on board, then you've got something to present elsewhere, haven't you? And I think that's possibly to start with. Where I mean, it's hard in the current financial climate. Don't get me wrong; it's very, very tough. And there's teams that are far bigger and far better organised than your Tier 3, 4, 5 women's teams to do that. But it's a way in potentially.
Yeah. Just before we move on to sort of a little bit on England and the Lionesses, I want to just actually shout out Clapton. I know you gave examples of teams, Gareth, but Clapton was a team that I wasn't aware of until they came up here and played FC United in a friendly. And again, sort of fan-owned community club. They came up, absolute credit to their club. It was a double header, a men's and a women's side that came up, and they were phenomenal. And again, they had a good FA Cup success story. And you look at the support and you look at that community and what it's about and everything they do. It reminds me a little bit of Lewis, but lower down. They have these values on equality, and they all work together. And they were saying sort of around that area, there's things they do for people, for example, with food banks, again, similar to Lewis. I think it's really good because it takes, like you say, a small sort of FA Cup success, and people think, wow. And I think something that stuck out in my mind as well as the fans was the little sort of dance and chant that the players do with the fans after the game. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but YouTube it and check it out. It's brilliant. And things like that. Again, these clubs deserve this recognition. And I think for the wider good of the game and the community, let's put football to one side. They do a lot, like I said, for the community. And I think, again, it's like you say, Ben, getting that name out there, and how many people will now be aware of them because of that FA Cup thing and local businesses and sponsorships. It's absolutely the way forward. And, I think we're all in agreement, fully believe that by making a better sort of 3rd, 4th and 5th tier, north, south, east and west, will eventually, hopefully, sort of kick the Championship and WSL into action and onto better things for the whole game, really, not just for the top 2 tiers, for the game in general. Ben, do you just want to finish off then? Obviously, we're talking Lionesses and you were on sort of a couple of the press calls earlier. Do you just want to sort of give us anything you got from those, any information? I know captain was mentioned for the first game, Leah Williamson.
Yeah, I mean, we had Lucy Bronze and Georgia Stanway who were up with the major today. It was interesting because, Lucy Bronze was sort of emphasising the fact that, this is her first time in the camp under the new sort of coaching team. And she kind of, it was interesting how, she emphasised that the thing that hit her was that there were so many new faces in the squad now. And I think, we could all say actually there should be a lot more, but just the fact that in itself, after where we've been for the last three years, I think was a big takeout for me in terms of, okay, things may be changing, albeit slowly, but they're changing in the right way. What was also really interesting as well about sort of the new regime is that, I asked Georgia Stanway what the new regime was doing for her as a player in terms of differences between Phil Neville and the previous interim coaches. And the word that she kept mentioning was support, and she kept mentioning, sort of like community and ethos and everything. And it, whilst none of us will ever know what it was like in the England team under various coaches, I think if you take both of those two things that both Lucy Bronze and Georgia Stanway said today, it gives you a sense of maybe why things weren't quite the way they should have been. I mean, I think we've all been frustrated with how things have gone when England and GB for that matter have played the top teams over the last 3 years or so. And we've never kind of really got to the bottom of why that is. But I just sort of wondered, is that possibly why? The fact that, it was, in Lucy Bronze's case, the same old faces, and B, Georgia Stanway's case, it was that sort of support and ethos wasn't quite right. They didn't actually come out and say that, but that's kind of what I took from it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting on that because, like you say, I think there's always talk and there's always opinions flying about on call-ups. And again, I'm not going to dive into that because we'll be here for another hour. But it's interesting, like you say, because I think what's good about this tournament, obviously, as well as it being new and here, is that if you look at the opposition, it's the first time we've faced anybody in the world's top 10 with Serena. You look at, I think Germany are third, are they? I know Canada and Spain are also, I think, something like 7th or 6th and 9th, very close anyway. And I think it's going to be a test, but I think from this we'll pretty much know the squad for the Euros, or Serena will know, should I say. I think there might be one or two tweaks. Obviously, Steph Horton's got an ankle injury. You'd probably expect her to be involved, but I think it's really interesting. Obviously, like you say, I do wonder now under, obviously, Serena, did wonders with the Dutch, including a Euros win, whether that together, I mean, listen, it will make a difference, but whether that togetherness can take them all the way. We see, obviously, it's the same old sort of thing with male and female England sides about the quarterfinals or semi-finals. Obviously, the men got to the Euros finals this time, but it just makes you wonder. And like you say, it's quite interesting hearing that and those players sort of talking that way in terms of, like you said, sort of the difference between there and Phil Neville. Gareth, I know you mentioned Euros before. Is there anything you want to sort of touch on what Ben said before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's shaping up to be a really interesting competition. And I know I said earlier on that I'm not a huge fan of these friendly tournaments, but it is a great opportunity for us to test ourselves and really use it as an opportunity to start really looking at the squad in terms of building towards that European Championship. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. I think it's going to be some really, really great games. And hopefully, we see a strong showing from the Lionesses.
Yeah, absolutely. We've come to the end of the show, so I want to say thank you, Ben, for joining myself and Gareth. Again, love chatting about sort of, the leagues outside the WSL, and obviously, we've hopefully provided viewers with a great insight. Thank you to those as well that tuned in. And we're back tomorrow, actually. We've got a Man United women's player on, something that we did in person. Not going to say who and give away the game just yet, because I know John will kill me, but tomorrow at 7:00. Make sure you check that out. It's the first time we've actually spoken to a current Man United women player. So have a look at that. Thursday, John's back with Emma Sean from Man City, and they're talking about both our seasons for City and United so far. And he's back Friday with Fans Forum. So yeah, thank you very much, and check out those shows as well. Cheers.